Welcome back to another episode of the Road to Avengers Endgame, and today I will be covering both Ant-Man and Age of Ultron. I'll be covering Avengers Age of Ultron first, because that came out first. So this is the sequel to, of course, the Avengers, and, well, this actually has a bit of a special place in my heart, because this was actually the first Marvel film I actually saw in the theater, around that time period in which it did come out, so it does sort of have a special place in my heart. And I actually do remember it was like one of those movies where I do remember just the advertising for it was just everywhere. And I actually have not seen it since then, and it's definitely not as good as I remember it to be. So let's go into that, but first let's talk about the plot. Or as much as I can be able to gather, because one of my issues with this movie is that it's a bit all over the place, so we'll talk about that later. So what is the plot? So, it's set after the events of the first Avengers and Captain America Civil War and all that. And Baron von Strucker has gotten Loki's scepter, and he's planning on using it for nefarious means, which we find out in a mid-credit scene in Captain America the Winter Soldier. Want to point out real quick, isn't it a bit bizarre that now the Avengers are assembling, like, now when Iron Man was threatened by a terrorist, or when, like, all the 9 realms were coming together, when it was found out that Hydra infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D., no, it's just to get Loki's scepter back? It's a bit weird. But then eventually Tony ends up getting like a vision by Scarlet Witch of the world being in ruins because he felt like he didn't do enough, so he planned on using the Loki scepter with the help of Bruce Banner in order to create Ultron, a peacekeeping initiative. However, Ultron realized the fact is that humanity is probably doing way more harm than it is good, so he decides that he's going to destroy humanity with a giant meteor, and that meteor being Sokovia, where Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver are from. And the twins eventually join the Avengers. They try and see if they could be able to create Vision. They also try and see if they could be able to stop Ultron and all that. So, what are my pros with this movie? Well, before we get into the whole thing, we need to really talk about the sort of production history behind this, because this was the last Marvel film that Joss Whedon was a part of, because he sort of felt like the studio was pressuring him to put in a lot of stuff, like, you gotta have Thor become aware of the Infinity Stones. Like, there was an entire hour of Thor subplot that was cut from this movie, and also there was, like, okay, so here's what you gotta have Thor become aware of this, you gotta introduce Vision, you gotta introduce all these story elements that will play later on in, like, the big grand scheme of things, and it was too much pressure on him, so he left. But, to be fair, it's, one, not entirely his fault, but then again, some of the bad stuff in this movie is not entirely the studio's fault either. More on that later. First of all, the pros. The action sequences are still really, really good. Ultron I actually think is actually not that bad. Now, in the comics, he's supposed to be a dark reflection of Hank Pym, as that was who he was created by in the comics, but it makes sense in the movies for him to be created by Tony Stark. In fact, there's actually a really cool scene in which, there's actually a really good scene that I remember that he loses his claw, he's trying to make a deal with Ultron to get vibranium, and Ultron makes says a line that Tony Stark says, and Claw's like, wait a minute, I remember that. Tony Stark used to say that. And then that's when he ends up getting his arm cut off by Ultron. He's like, I'm nothing like Stark. Don't ever compare me to him. Like, I wish we got more scenes like that. That was actually really cool. I also really like how they further develop Hawkeye's character in this too. About how they give him a family and all that other stuff. And I also really like sort of that little speech that he gives to Scarlet Witch. It's like, we're out there on a floating island facing robots and I got a bow and arrow. I really like that little speech. I thought he was really good. I also sort of like the little calm moments between whenever there's not like the big action sequences or when they're trying to go someplace. Like the scene in which they're partying, in which they're trying to lift up Thor's hammer. That's nice. I also sort of like the little scene in which the little vignettes that each of the characters have when they're at the at Hawkeye's farm. Some vignettes I did not like, but we'll get to that later. The message, like, I really like the backstory behind Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, in which they were sort of screwed over by Stark and S.H.I.E.L.D. But when Nick Fury shows up with the helicarriers to save everybody, and Quicksilver's like, is this what S.H.I.E.L.D. is? And Cap's like, well, it should be, yes. It's like, it just mentions, like, if something's corrupt, then that doesn't mean the fact that it's entirely bad. You just gotta file all the bad people and the corruptness out of it, and then it'll be fine. Well, that's not how that works, but you get what I'm trying to say. And I also really like the, how it's sort of made in direct reference to Man of Steel, in which Man of Steel, Superman just destroys a city and millions die, and you pretty much did nothing about it. This is trying to show the fact that we need to save as much people as we possibly can. We don't get to go home unless every single person's there. Not even one person gets to be left behind. Well, we sort of delve into the fact that that's not really the case, but we'll get to that in Civil War. In fact, Ultron actually sort of what he talks about sort of takes place in Civil War. It's like how the Avengers are doing more harm than they are good, and then we sort of play on those elements in Civil War and get the idea. Cons. The pacing's a bit all over the place. Like, for example, let me give you a little sum about what happens in like the first couple of minutes of the movie. The Avengers are currently fighting Ultron. Why? Who cares? You could go... No, wait, no. The Avengers are currently trying to get Loki's scepter back. Why? Why Jason Shield to be able to figure that out? Then they get it, and then Tony gets like this vision of like everything being destroyed. What happens afterwards? The Avengers, they're currently partying, and then Ultron ends up interrupting the party, and like he destroys a lot of stuff. And then the Avengers ultimately have to go find Ultron to be able to stop him from getting vibranium from this other guy. Well, also Thor's having visions about the Infinity Stones, and they eventually later on create Vision. And then they had to be able to go to figure out how to go to Sokovia, and how to be able to save Black Widow, who was kidnapped by Ultron, and a lot of other stuff happens. So, and I really don't feel like and I really wanted to know more about the new characters, Quicksilver, Scarlet Witch, and Vision. But I wish we sort of had movies about them first, that way we could be able to know them a little better before we see them in this movie. And the whole movie, they hype out the fact that Hawkeye is supposed to die, but Quicksilver dies, which kind of makes sense because Fox is currently using him for the X-Men movies, and they're not using Scarlet Witch. It's one of those rare instances in which Marvel and Fox both own the same characters, but I digress. Yeah. Also, the studio meddling stuff I already mentioned beforehand. The dialogue is not very good. Like, the first Avengers film shows everything that's good about Joss Whedon. This shows everything that's not good with Joss Whedon. The characters, the way he writes the characters do not feel like the way that they've been throughout each of the movies. Thor sort of feels similar, but I actually think the one that got screwed over the most was Black Widow because... Oh, man, like, the whole point of Black Widow is that she's trying to do good and be able to make up for, like, this terrible past that she has. And she sort of feels like that teenage girl who just wants to get into the Hulk's pants, if that's an appropriate saying, I guess. But also, I kind of feel like the fact that the relationship between the Hulk and Black Widow just absolutely came out of nowhere. But it makes sense for her and Captain America to get together because we saw their chemistry in Winter Soldier. But it just feels weird. And also, like, Iron Man's dialogue really isn't all that great either. Like, I'm pretty sure in the party scene where they're trying to lift Thor's hammer, I'm pretty sure he makes 3 penis jokes. And there's also the scene in which they're trying to create Vision, and then Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver is there, and Bruce Banner's like, go on, make me angry, I dare you. It's like, where did all of this come from? This is not like any of the other characters. So, bottom line, not as good as all the other Marvel movies, but it's not completely terrible. If I had to give it a score, I'd give it a 7.5. Now we move on to Ant-Man. Now, a lot of people know that Edgar Wright was originally attached to this movie, but he left due to creative differences with Marvel, and Peyton Reed was hired on to Ant-Man. And this follows, in the plot of this movie, follows Scott Lang as he's recruited by Hank Pym and his daughter Hope Van Dyne in order to stop Darren Cross from unleashing a Yellow Jacket suit, which is modeled after his Ant-Man tech. So they have to be able to figure out how to steal the suit and the tech and be able to stop Darren Cross. Now, a lot of people thought that this movie was okay. I think I actually sort of like this movie a bit more than others just because, well, there's just a lot of funny stuff in this movie that I like. Like, I love the interactions between Scott and the Pyms. There are some exchanges in which they're actually really, really funny. I really like Scott's, like, 3 friends, or as Michael Douglas refers to them, the Wombats. They're absolutely hilarious. I love Michael Pena. He's absolutely hilarious. And I really love the way he, like, tells the story, like, how he ended up getting this job, or how Falcon is actually looking for him, which, spoilers, Falcon shows up in this movie because, you know, they have an Avenger in there, but I digress. I really like that. I love these little interactions between everybody. And I sort of like the heist theming of it all because it's actually not that bad. Like, we've never really seen, like... Sure, we've seen, like, different other types of superhero movies before, but we've never really seen one that was a heist, so that was actually kind of cool. And not only that, but it's just funny. There's, like, a ton of quotable lines that I remember, like, of course, Baskin-Robbins always finds out. Paul Rudd is, of course, absolutely hilarious. Michael Douglas is great, as usual. I thought Evangeline Lilly, I think that what we're given in the movie, it's good, but I'm really looking forward to when she became the Wasp, and of course Ant-Man and the Wasp, which was really nice. If I did have one criticism with it, though, is that once again, the villain's not all that strong. He's just a bit of a stick in the mud, of course. He's just like a generic guy. But I will admit, the yellow jacket suit is actually kind of cool. The person inside it, on the other hand, yeah, not all that great. And I do feel like the movie, and I really do like all the stuff that's going on. But it sort of feels like an homage to, like, of course, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. In fact, there was actually talks for Rick Moranis to have a cameo in there. So overall, Ant-Man I think is actually a pretty solid Marvel movie. I think I would give it an 8.5 out of 10. So tune in next time, in which I'm actually not going to be covering a Marvel movie. I'll be covering a DC film, a major one that came out this weekend. He used to go by the name of Captain Marvel, but now he goes by the name of somebody else. He goes by the name of Shazam. So tune in soon for that, and as always, stay gold.